when we talk of how English language had its origin, or where exactly the language that we speak today, the English language that we speak today, had its origin, we would be surprised to know that the language has actually traveled a very long journey along quite a few ages, has undergone a lot of changes, mutations, permutations, borrowing, shedding of certain words, and has finally reached shape that we call as English. And today we know in the after 20th century, we also have various English in its various other forms, as Indian English, as American English, Australian English, and so on. When we talk of the origin of language, it is very interesting to note that originally the language had its birth in the West. That is, when we look at the family of languages that actually got scripted out, we'll find that English actually had its origin from the Germanic group. Okay, so before we go into that, let's talk of how language as such, not English in specific, but how language as such had emerged. So, so when we talk of language, we say that it is a means to communicate our thoughts, our ideas to another person. So language is of an evolutionary nature. So what is the meaning of evolutionary? Which keeps changing. So it is not something that is constant or static. It undergoes a lot of change over a period of time with usage, with constant usage, right? So language is one distinguishing aspect that records human communication. So I have given a quote here, which is up on your screen. Over the years, there have been numerous attempts to teach apes to speak, and in particular chimpanzees, which are humans' closest living relative. However, no other animal has the vocal pathology necessary to speak the way we do. Even attempting to teach chimps sign language has proven fruitless, with no animal demonstrating skill above the level of a 2-year-old human. It seems the three things a creature needs to speak like a human is a human's brain, a human's vocal cords, and a human's intelligence. So when we look at how language has become the medium of communication, so it doesn't mean that birds don't communicate or animals don't communicate, nature doesn't communicate. No, everything communicates, but the communication that goes on among human beings is quite different, and that is something very distinct that characterizes human communication. So these are three things that scientists found necessary for human-like communication. One is the brain, another is the vocal cords, another is human's intelligence. So what language has undergone is, say, for example, some time back, what was called as a bad communication could now be considered as good communication, right? So language as such always undergoes a lot of change. So so as I was telling you, language is that is speech, the factor. The speech factor is something that distinguishes man from animals. Now, Professor Lloyd James, who in his book Our Spoken Language, he says that animals had necessary speech organs, at least in the embryo. But had they shown the aptitude to use them the way the man did, then they too would have developed a similar way of communication. So Lord Thomas feels that it is all an inbuilt aptitude, not attitude, an inbuilt aptitude to respond to communication in a way that is better understood, right? So Lyot says that it is, though they had, at least at the embryo level, though they had these speech organs, but they should have developed an aptitude to use them the way that man does to communicate. Okay, so that is why our spoken language, that is the human spoken language, is different from the way animals or birds communicate. Okay, so G. Eliot Smith, he also said that discovery of speech marked the beginning of man. So when man discovered that I am capable of speaking, I am capable of conveying my thoughts through my speech, that marked the beginning of man's life. All right. So um, looking at the way language had its origin and language developed, there are four major theories. Now, this is a question that is repetitive, appears in almost all examinations. There are four major theories: bow wow theory, ding dong theory, poo poo theory, and gesture theory. Now, these four theories are very important. They are the major theories that explain how language evolved, how communication evolved. Okay, so please make note of these four theories: bow wow theory, ding dong, poo poo, and gesture. Now, apart from these, over a period of time, maybe after some centuries, we also, latest is the Tata theories. Now, we also have something like the Yo Hey O or the Lala or the Tata theories. They are later, they've been formulated by later theorists. Okay, but the established ones that we may find uh, authentic, as well as something that could be really believed that could be acceptable, are these four theories. One is bow wow, ding dong, poo poo, and gesture. As I told you, these four are very important, so please make note of it, and we're going to do in detail. Now, from the examination point of view, I shall give you certain keywords which will help you identify the theory. Which theory does the question, which theory is being questioned. Okay. Are you able to see? Ah, yes. Now, okay. So let's go to the bow wow theory first. Now, what is the key word for bow wow theory? Onomatopoeia, or natural sounds, imitating natural sounds. These are the two key words that you need to remember. I'm sure you people must have gone through certain. Some of you might have already appeared for TRB examinations. Many of you would have already gone through a lot of question papers, previous year's question papers, and I'm sure you will agree with me that all the question papers do have a question on the theories, the four theories. So how do you identify? How do you write? How do you choose the answer? So the first keyword for bow wow theory is onomatopoeia, or imitation of natural sounds. Okay. Now, what does this bow wow theory actually say? Now, what is bow wow? Bow wow is how a dog barks, right? So a dog's barking, we call it as bow wow. Okay. So the dog, when we tell our kids, see, that's a bow wow there. So what's a bow wow? That's a dog. So that's the way a dog shouts or a dog barks, right? So the key term bow wow theory came from this idea that communication would have developed, or words would have been coined as imitating natural sounds. sounds in nature. Either could be from animals, could be from waterfalls, could be from birds, right? Could be from thunder, could be from a huge fall of a tree, a huge fall of a rock. Okay, so from nature, onomatopoeia. I'm sure you all must be familiar with this word onomatopoeia. Onomatopoeia is a figure of speech, right? Which means sounds. Okay, sounds. Say, for example, whiz, shh, ba, right? So these are sounds. Onomatopoeia is an imitation of sound. So Bow-wow theory states that language would have originated by imitating sounds in nature in the form of onomatopic words. I've given you some examples here, like say for example, shoe. So we say shoo shoo, right? So this could have originated from originated by imitating a sound from nature. Say, you know, the crow crows as caw caw, right? So maybe this sound could have, they would have taken it from the crow. Say similarly cuckoo, similarly meow from a cat. Say shh, you know, from the rustling of leaves it could be. Say dum dum could be from thunder. So a fall of a rock or a fall of a tree could have been with a thud, right? So the word thud could have come from there. So this is just a theory that states that words could have been coined or communication could have originated as a part of imitating natural sounds, which is another word, which is also called as onomatopoeia. So if a question comes where state, check the theory, state the theory that says that communication or language originated by imitating natural sounds, you could, with confidence, click bow-wow theory. Okay. So let's go to the next one. The ding-dong theory. Now, the key word for ding-dong theory is rhythm. Okay, so the key word for ding-dong theory is rhythm. So, what do the ding-dong theorists state? Now, this is again proposed by Max Muller, which is followed by Bucher. Okay, so what does Max Muller propose? He says that communication language would have originated through interaction between natural movements perceived in nature and human response through the vocal noise. Say, for example, we are walking we are walking in a jungle, okay, in a forest. Now, say sometimes I'm sure you all must have watched history or Animal Planet or National Geographic Channel. Now you would see that people who walk into these forests keep making some sounds, you know, like whoo, ah, right? These kind of sounds. So what do these kind of sounds do? It kind of shows the human reaction to the natural sound. Now, when human responds through his or her vocal noise as a response to nature, okay, it kinds of imitates the rhythmic movement in nature. Okay, so say for example, whistling. Now, whistling is it's a human, it's a sound made by humans, but it's not an originally human sound, right? It is something that's found in nature. Okay, say for example, the gurgling water. Okay, so when you sit next to a stream of water, you hear the gurgling sound of the water, right? So that's a rhythm. There is a rhythm. There is a beat in the movement of water. There is a rhythm in the movement of the wind. Say when the wind blows, zzz, right? So when there is a storm, when there is a when there is a wind, heavy wind, we find that there is a rhythm in the wind too. So when the ding dong theorists assume that communication or language could have originated as a response to the rhythmic movement in nature, okay, by imitating the rhythm itself. Okay, so this is what the ding dong theorists state. I hope it's clear. In the late 20th century, this also we find this ding dong theory to be true when it comes to these savage war dance or even the medieval ballads, right? So there you find that there is a drum that keeps beating, the rhythm, and then they keep shouting ha ha hoo hoo, right? So these are some sounds that imitate the rhythm of nature. Okay, so this is a very relevant example that you could remember to understand what is ding dong theory. So I'm just trying to repeat the ding dong theory. The theorists who proposed, especially Max Muller, followed by Butcher, they said that communication or language could have emerged through imitation of rhythm in nature. Okay, next.
Excuse me, ma'am. Maximize your screen, ma'am.
Oh, you're not able
It's
to
so
see.
small.
The problem is I'm not able to move to the next slide when it's on a full screen mode.
Okay, ma'am. Okay.
Okay, that's the reason maybe I'll
For
just.
taking notes, it's difficult.
Okay, now is it fine?
Hi, now it's fine, ma'am.
It's
Okay,
fine, but
ma'am.
then
Thank you.
I'll just check if I can move to the next screen. Okay, fine.
Ah,
Able
okay.
to move, right?
Okay.
So let's move to the poo-poo theory. Now, poo-poo theory says that communication or language could have emerged through emotional interjections. I'm sure all of you know what are interjections, right? In English, we have 7 parts of speech, and out of them we have interjections, which kind of communicate surprise, shock, words that communicate surprise, shock, sadness, happiness, excitement, right? So these are called interjections. So emotional interjections. So as you know that human beings are emotional beings. Humans are emotional beings. So as we express our emotions of anger, sadness, grumpiness, surprise, happiness, sadness, shock, any response, any emotional response it could be. So these are some raw noises. That's why we call them brute noises, raw noises. When we try to express our grief, when we try to express our happiness, sadness, shock, surprise, excitement, we definitely do it through some kind of a noise, right? Some kind of an expression, a vocal expression. So poo-poo theory states that communication or language could have emerged as a part of, as a response, as a part of our emotional response. Okay, say words like ah, ooh, ouch, yeah, ha ha ha, wow. These are some words that express our emotions. Say for example, when I say ouch, so that's something that shows a kind of a shock or a pain. Okay, then say then it could be it could mean something that's acceptance, or just a nod. Okay, say an expression called ha 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 means I'm laughing. Expression like wow, there's something kind of a surprise. Okay, so yay, something kind of an excitement. Okay, so these are some words that express our emotions. All right, but this theory, poo-poo theory, the theorists say that this could this could have been the beginning of language itself. So it is not just sound, but they also convey an idea, convey an emotion. So some theorists feel that this could have been the beginning of language itself. Though this word, the term poo-poo theory, uh, kind of has undergone a lot of change over a period of time as a part of the expression. Now say this is one expression that you could just see: to poo poo a scheme means to nullify it, to kind of consider it as non-existent at all, kind of kind of shooing it away, right? So this has undergone a change, the term itself, but then the theorists feel that communication or language could have emerged as a response, as a part of our emotional response. The last one, and also a very important theory is gesture theory. And I'm sure gesture theory is a very popular theory because even today, till today, we study verbal, non-verbal communication as a part of our verbal and non-verbal communication. So non-verbal communication is nothing but gesture theory, a kind of an extension of gesture theory. So these theorists feel that communicational language would have originated from gesture itself. So this theory was advanced by, initially propagated by Wilhelm Wundt, and a name that you must remember as a close associate of gesture theory. Okay, so William Wundt felt that earliest communication definitely would have happened through gestures only. So William Wundt, and a close associate of gesture theory, so please make note of the name. This theory was restated by Sir Richard Paget in his book Human Speech, another important name and an important work. So he said that it would have begun with hand gestures and slowly moved to the tongue, then to the lip and to the jaw gestures, and trying to sync the two. Sync in the sense join or mix the two. So this would have finally led to spoken language. That is what Sir Richard Paget proposed. So initially, the gesture theory was propagated or advanced by Wilhelm Wundt. Later on, Sir Richard Paget kind of extended it by justifying Wilhelm Wundt's propagation, saying that maybe communication began with hand gestures. Now, friends, you also might feel the same. Say, when we tell someone to come close to us, say, come. So obviously, inadvertently, unconsciously, what do? Our hands kind of move, our hands move towards us, right? So when we say come, obviously our fingers, our hands gesture the other person to come close to us. So similarly, when we say go, so obviously there is our hand movement is kind of going away from us. Say we try to tell someone to switch off the light or switch on the light or switch off the fan. So what do? We gesture. We not only speak orally, switch off the fan, but unconsciously our hands also move towards the direction of the switch and towards the direction of the fan, and then we try to communicate, switch it off. Okay, so this is gesture. So Richard Paget said that communication would have moved from hand gestures initially. It would have slowly moved to the tongue, the lip, and the jaw, and that's how spoken language would have emerged. And the same gesture theory I told you some time back, that in the 21st century, it is called the body language. I've given you some pictures here. Say, for example, there is a girl who is, trying to tell us to be silent. Okay, so she just keeps her forefinger on her lip, and then we all know that it means to be silent. Similarly, there is a hand that fist, two fists joined together, which maybe shows authority, which shows prayer. It could show prayer. It could show closeness, strength. Okay, so there is a lady at the end of the screen, left corner of the screen, who says either could mean to come or to give. Okay, then there are two hands that shows pray. Okay, praying, and then there is one hand on your right, which kind of asks, give. Okay, so these are gestures. So finally, associated with gesture theory, they accompany the verbal or the oral words. Okay, now let's move on to the second heading. So these are four things that you need to really understand well. The four theories, that is a bow wow, ding dong, poo poo, and gesture. Okay, you'll have to remember bow wow is associated with onomatopoeia or natural sounds, or imitation, and then ding dong is associated with natural rhythm, imitation of natural rhythm. Poo poo is related to emotional interjections, and gesture, you need to remember the name of the person, that is William Wundt and Richard Paget, and the book Human Speech. Now, if you remember in the first scene, I had included some other theories like Yo-Hey-Ho and so on. Now, Yo-Hey-Ho is actually the rhythmic chant. You can just note it down in case a question arises, though it is not mentioned in the syllabus or it's not mentioned in the book. In case a question arises, you may just
Excuse me,
note.
ma'am.
Yes,
Ma'am, will you please repeat it once again?
which one?
I didn't hear it properly, ma'am. Will you
The
repeat
last
it
one?
once again?
Which one? The last one, Yo-Hey-Ho.
Yes, ma'am.
Which
Yes,
one
ma'am.
you did not hear? The poo-poo theory or gesture theory? Which one?
No, ma'am.
La-
We came across that actually the other theory, which is
The
not
last
in
one.
our yes,
Yo-Hey-Ho,
ma'am.
is
It's
it?
not in our syllabus. Yeah, ma'am. Yes, ma'am.
Yeah. 1 minute. I can maybe move to that screen.
Thank you, ma'am.
Yeah.
Do you see that at the end of the
Yeah.
screen?
Yeah, ma'am. Yo hey ho la la
Right,
ta
right,
ta.
exactly.
Something like this.
So this Yo-Hey-Ho theory, it actually it states that communication or language would have arisen as a part of hard labor as a group. Say, for example, you know this Fevicol ad, right? Where they dum lagake, ailisha, you know that
Yeah,
kind
yeah,
of a
yes,
rhythm,
ma'am. Yes,
right?
ma'am.
So
Yes,
this
ma'am.
rhythmic chant or noise, when you know the earliest man used to work in groups, they all stayed as groups. So they lived in groups. So when they were into hard labor, so maybe in order to when they were exerting themselves too hard, in order to feel a bit relaxed, maybe they vented out certain noise, vented out certain shouts. Okay, so some kind of a chant, some kind of a noise that they rhythmic chant that they vented out. Okay, so the theorists feel that actually this Yo-Hey-Ho is also been proposed by Max Muller, but I couldn't really trace the authenticity of that. So that's why I'm not emphasizing that Yo-Hey-Ho was proposed by Muller. But then in case you're able to get a hang of it, then maybe you can find that out. But I wasn't able to exactly point out, look up at Yo-Hey-Ho being proposed by Muller. So Max Muller. So this theory states that language to communicate one's grunts, one's calls, one's exertion. Okay, so language would have originated as a process of responding or venting out one's grunt or tiredness in order to forget or in order to relieve themselves from getting tired. So these kind of rhythmic chants. Okay, so language would have originated through that. Okay, that process. Lala and Tata theories, they're very, very similar to, Ding Dong, okay, where there's a kind of a rhythm that's there in that's there in language. That's what these theories say. But then, as it's actually not there as a part of your syllabus. I just thought maybe I could give you some extra information in case you encounter this in your exam. Next point is place of English in the Indo-European family. This chart that I've put up on the screen will be very useful to you. It is available on the internet nevertheless, but then maybe you can take a screenshot of it or something like that, and so that you can, or maybe I don't know whether it's there in your material. I'm not very sure of it. If it's there in the
Ma'am,
material,
it is there in our material, ma'am.
it is there. Is it there in the
It's there
material?
in the material, ma'am.
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, fine. So maybe you can refer to that. It's a very important chart which helps you trace modern English that we speak today to the Germanic family. Okay, so I can give you maybe a couple of minutes for you to just simply go through this entire chart. You should know that the best known kind of international language is Esperanto. Maybe that's not mentioned here. You may take note of it. The best known kind of international language is Esperanto. Esperanto.
Once again,
Esperanto. Esperanto. The best known kind of international language. So if we look at what are the parent languages that gave birth to all the languages that exist today, we find that there are two main families. One is the Aryan family, another is the Indo-European family. Aryan family and then the Indo-European family. Now, initially, the term Aryan was abandoned, but later on it was considered as a subdivision of the parent language. So initially, they considered there were two different families. One is the Aryan family, another is the Indo-European family. But slowly, the Aryan was abandoned as a family of its own, but began to be considered as a subdivision of the Indo-European family itself. And that is what had given rise to the Indian languages, say the Sanskrit, Persian, and other such Indian languages. Okay, so there was another group called as the Indo-Germanic. But then the entire term Indo-Germanic was not considered because the term did not give prominence to its relation to the Romance and the Slavonic languages. And that is why the Indo-European family of languages stays put, and then it is something that's established as the parent family. Okay. There are some things that I couldn't actually put it up on the screen, so maybe you can note down. It is based on the questions, okay, the previous year's questions. I've tried to simplify certain things. So maybe what you can do is you can
Excuse me, ma'am.
Yes.
Ma'am,
Yes.
your voice is really slow. I can't able to hear, ma'am.
What is wrong there? Is it the same for everybody?
No, ma'am. I think it's somewhat
No, ma'am.
average
No,
level.
ma'am.
We
We
hear
can
in
hear,
average
ma'am.
level.
I too can hear, ma'am.
I think it's good.
Maybe I'll try pulling out the microphone and just try. Is it clear now?
Yeah, now
Yes,
it's
ma'am.
audible, ma'am. It's now
Is it
audible.
clear?
Okay,
Yes, ma'am. Clear, ma'am.
Okay. So do you feel this is better than the previous one?
Yeah.
Yeah,
ma'am.
better.
All right. All right.
Somewhat along with the echo sound, actually.
All right.
Thank you, ma'am.
Thank you.
I've switched off the fan, so maybe it could be clearer now. So I would want all of you to draw this in your notes because I couldn't actually draw it on the screen. So write Indo-European on top, and there are two branches. One is the Eastern, another is the Western. Okay, so Indo-European on top. To the left, you can draw a branch, call it Eastern, and to the right, you can draw a branch, call it Western. So under Eastern, I hope you're able to follow.
Yes, ma'am. Yes, ma'am.
Okay.
Yes,
So
ma'am.
under Eastern, you may write the Satem, S-A-T-E-M, Satem, which is 100 in Iranian. Okay, so Satem means 100 in Iranian language. So under Eastern, you may write S-A-T-E-M, Satem group of languages, which consist of Sanskrit, Iranian, Slavic, and others. Sanskrit, Iranian, Slavic, and others. So these are the Satem group of languages. So the meaning of Satem is 100 in the Iranian language. On to the right, to your Western group. So under Indo-European, you have, to the left you have Eastern, and to the right you have Western. So under Western, you have the Centum group of languages, C-E-N-T-U-M, the Centum group of languages. So centum is 100 in Latin. I'm sure all of us know that centum means 100, and the word centum is a Latin word. So centum group of languages, which means centum means 100 in Latin. So this centum group of languages include Celtic, 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 Germanic, Germanic, Italic, Italic, and Greek. Celtic, Germanic, Italic, and Greek. So there was a question in one of the previous year's question papers asking for the Satum group or the Centum group. Okay, so if at all you have a question of that sort, you will be able to answer that question with this chart. Okay, so Indo-European divided into Eastern and Western. The Eastern called as the Satum group of languages, and the Western called the Centum group of languages. Under Eastern, you have the major languages Sanskrit, Iranian, Slavic, and others. And under Western, you have the Celtic, Germanic, Italic, and Greek. Okay. Right. So now, looking at this chart, we find that. Okay. So. So Dr. Henry Bett's Wanderings Among Words, the book, which was written in 1936, a 20th century book, he tried to equate or tried to kind of relate how words would have originated. Say, for example, in Latin, the word calculus meant pebbles, okay? And Henry Bett studied that pebbles were used to used for counting purposes. Okay, so and maybe that's the reason we got this word calculate. Okay, so he this is just one example out of the innumerable examples that he gives in the books, gives in his book. So so this book and the name is important. Maybe you can note that down. And what he tried to do, he tried to relate how words could have, how words in English could have had their origin in other languages, especially Latin. Okay, so this is what I told you just now in the form of a diagram, which you would have drawn now, Satum and the Centum group. Then we have the Romance languages, which are the French, Italian, Spanish, Portuguese, and Romanian. These are called the Romance languages. So what exactly happened was 3500 BC, okay? These tribes, if you look at this chart, you'll find these tribes went into different directions, okay? So as they, now you would see that it is 3500 to 3000 BC. So this was the time when exactly these tribes, okay, they tried to venture out into different directions. So as they ventured into different directions, they carried some basic communication, some basic language that was quite common among all of them. As they dispersed into different directions and they came to meet certain other indigenous tribes with their interaction with them, with their own native language that they carried along, they tried to dissipate the language that they had formed as a tribe. Okay, and that's what we see as the parent language, the Aryan, the Indo-Germanic, or the Indo-European. This starts with the primitive Germanic, or which is otherwise called the Teutonic language. So if you look at this, if you can see my cursor, I don't think so you'll be able to see my cursor. Are you able to see my cursor?
Yes, ma'am.
Yes, ma'am.
Yes, ma'am.
So you find this Germanic here, which straight away goes to, there's a green line, Germanic, which was again dissipated into North, East, and West Germanic. And then the West Germanic dialect is again divided into High and the Low German. The High German became the original German that people speak today, the German language that we know today, spoken in Germany. And then the Low German was again divided into four different tribes, among four different tribes: the Old Frisian, the Anglo-Saxon, the Old Saxon, and the Low Franconian, right? And then we find that Anglo-Saxon, the dialect, the Anglo-Saxon spoken by the tribes, the Angles and the Saxons. So when the language spoken by them, the Anglo-Saxon language, which is also called the Old English, further developed into Middle English, and now is what we call the Modern English. Okay, so another word for this primitive Germanic is Teutonic. So one of the question papers had this question. Okay, so they did not mention it as Germanic, but then they called it Teutonic. So you should also know that Germanic or the primitive Germanic could also be called Teutonic. So the most important language of primitive Germanic or the Teutonic was Gothic. Okay, so remember that Gothic, West Germanic, and Scandinavian are other offshoots. Okay. This is the West Germanic that was again divided into three, which is Old High German, which is what we call the German today, the Old Low German, which is called the Dutch today, and the Anglo-Saxon, Middle English, and Modern English. So this chart could help you understand that Teutonic, one of the ancient languages of Teutonic is Gothic. Okay, so that was a question there. Can I move on?
Yeah, ma'am.
When we come to primitive, now you all know that we have already seen it is the Germanic group. So when we look at Indo-European family of languages, we find that it is the modern English that we speak today had its origin in the Germanic family. Okay, so if you look at the languages that we speak, the Indian languages, they come from the Aryan family. Okay. And you also please take note of this group, the Celtic group. So when we talk of the Angles and the Saxons, now when these tribes originally, they belong to the European nations. Okay, the Germany, Scandinavia, which is again, it's also called as Norse. Then we have the Dutch. Then we have the Denmark. Then we have the people from Denmark, the tribes from Denmark. So these people moved from Europe to Britain. Okay, so Britain originally, the people in Britain, you should remember this. The people in Britain spoke Celtic. Now you see this group here, Celtic, which is divided into Irish, Welsh, Gaelic, and Breton. So please understand that the original Bretons, okay, Britons that we call, they spoke Celtic. Okay, and the original language spoken in Britain by the Bretons was Celtic. Definitely the people in Ireland spoke Irish, and the ones in they spoke Welsh. Then you have the Gaelic and the Breton, which are again other dialects of the Celtic itself. Okay, so when these Angles and the Saxons, they moved towards Britain, they tried to settle down in various areas of Great Britain itself, and that's how we find that these Anglo-Saxons, they invaded these lands, and then when they tried to settle down, they tried to establish their tongue, the Anglo-Saxon language, in the British land itself. Okay, so this is the entire history cut short into a single sentence, that Anglo-Saxons were tribes from the European land who moved to Britain and settled down there and tried to spread their language, which is nothing but Anglo-Saxon. Okay. What you need to remember next is the Grimm's Law. So I hope you people understand that I would not be able to deal in detail in the given 2 hours time. So I will only be taking the important points. Okay, it's already 1 hour getting over. So I will only be dealing with important points which you will have to remember from the examination point of view. In case you're more interested, you can definitely take note of these points, and then maybe you can just Google and you will be able to find some answers, some interesting facts on that. So next thing that you need to remember is Grimm's Law. Now, what is Grimm's Law and why is it important to us? So as I told you, the original Britons spoke Celtic, right? So when these Anglo-Saxons moved into, and I also told you that 3500 BC, they all kind of dispersed across lands, and that's how the Angles and the Saxons, they came to the British island, okay? And that is what we call the British island today, the Britain. So the Great Britain. So they tried to settle down there. So what happened exactly was when they carried along with them languages, they met few of the indigenous tribes too, who had their own language. As I told you, the Britons spoke Celtic, right? So they had to encounter a language that was quite different from theirs. Okay, so that is where we have this important concept called the consonant shift. Okay, so what exactly is consonant shift? When these Anglo-Saxons or other these tribes they carried their language, there was a shift from the original Latin which is spoken, okay, because you know that these people came from the European nations, right? So there was a consonant shift where these consonants which I have listed on the screen, say P, T, D, G, G, B, K, S. Now, I'm only trying to tell you the phonetic sound of these consonants, not the letters themselves. They are the phonetic sounds of these consonants. Say P, T, D, G, B, K, S. These Latin phonetic sounds changed to F, T, T, K, P, H, Z when it came to Germanic. Okay, so basically, Grimm's Law, which is a very important law according to philologists, he said that the 19th century Latin and he compared the 19th century Latin and Germanic, okay, the Germanic languages. He said that the former retained the Indo-European consonant, that is the Latin, retained the Indo-European consonant, and the Germanic, and the latter, that is the primitive Germanic group, followed a kind of a consonant shift. So Latin retained the Indo-European consonant, which is nothing but P, T, D, G, B, K, S, and the Germanic, that is the another group, that is the Germanic group, they followed a shift in the consonant. The shift was P, or the P sound changed to F in Germanic. The T in Latin changed to Th in the Germanic. D changed to T. G changed to K. B changed to P. So K changed to H. S changed to Z. If you see, the lighter sounds changed to heavier sounds, okay, in Germanic. So this theory was further extensively researched and proved by the Danish philologist Werner in his Werner's Law. I hope this is clear. So you'll have to remember Jacob Grimm, the Grimm's Law, who states that the Indo-European consonant retained the, Latin retained the Indo-European consonant, whereas Germanic, the primitive Germanic, kind of initiated a shift in the consonant. And Werner's Law took some examples. How P would have changed to F, how T would have changed to Th. He proves it with certain examples. Okay, so the primitive Germanic group has these three important languages. That is the Gothic, in which the Christian Gospels were written and translated by Bishop Ulfilas. Maybe you can note that down. And then you have, under Primitive Germanic, you have the Scandinavian or the Norse language. Then we have the West Germanic, which is nothing but the Anglo-Saxon language. So Primitive Germanic has three languages under it: Gothic, Scandinavian, and West Germanic. So West Germanic was actually the Anglo-Saxon language, which later on led to the Old English, the Middle English and the Modern English. Okay. Okay, I would also like to tell you something more about this. Now there's something that I got to read. For example, now do you see this, that the sir in Latin changes to zer, right? And there's also another thing, another point. So, for example, when the sound sir appears in the middle of a word, say for example, or middle in the sense the end of the verb, end of a word, say for example in is or was, it changed to ra sound. Okay, so say for example was or is changed to were or are. So the result, the reason for the change could be traced to the Germanic consonant shift. Okay, the Grimm's law. So maybe if you're asked a question saying the change of was and is to were and are, the reason for it could be traced to dash. So maybe you could write the answer as the Germanic consonant shift or Grimm's law. Okay, so that's the reason. So this is why they feel that sir changes to zer, and in the middle it changes, sir changes to ra. And you know the voiced consonants are b, w, d, t, d, g, k. And the voiceless are p, f, t, k, and h. And the nasal are m, n, and ng. So these were studied by Grimm, and how they change to. You have a table in your, probably in your material, or you may refer to the question to the text itself, where you have a long table that talks of how what b changes to p and how v changes to f and so on. So all the voiced change to the voiceless. So I told you. So from the heavier ones we change to lighter ones, right? So all the voice change to voiceless. Now let's move on to the third topic, which is Old English and Middle English. Old English, the period for Old English was 600 AD to 1100 AD. So by 600 AD, we find that the Angles of the Saxons were established in Britain. 1066, there was the Norman invasion. Which was by the French. So by 1100, we find that the French influence was heavy on the Saxon tongue itself. Okay, so 1066, with the Norman invasion, we find a lot of French words coming into Anglo-Saxon language. Okay, so the Angles and the Saxons who settled in Britain, they had to face Norman invasion, that is invasion by the French. The Wessex or the West Saxon, okay, the dialect spoken in the Wessex region, that is the West Saxons, the people settled in Wessex were called, they were actually West Saxons. Because they settled in that place, the place began to be called as Wessex. So the dialect that was spoken in Wessex stayed on, and the works that were written in this dialect, that is dialect spoken in Wessex, were Beowulf, Anglo-Saxon Chronicles, and even the historical record by King Alfred the Great too. Okay, and what we find is the grammar of Anglo-Saxon was very complicated. Another word for Anglo-Saxon is Old English. Okay, so it was quite complicated. The Anglo-Saxon language had a very complicated grammar. We find that traces of other dialects were also evident in English, though there were a lot of dialectical variations, because I told you these people dissipated into different lands, right? So obviously the dialects, so some of them retained the Indo-European words, Indo-European dialect, Indo-European sounds of these consonants and vowels. Some of them tried to accept the indigenous or the local sounds, and that's how we find that there was a dialectical difference in the language itself. Okay, so for example, the word WHOLE, whole, and the word HALE. Okay, so now these two words originally spoken, they had their biblical meaning as healthy. Okay, but then there were two different dialects. So similarly, if you find TROUGH, trough, and TRUG. Now, if you see TRUG, trug, okay, so this is nothing but a Sussex word for a shallow basket used by farmers. So slowly, due to the consonant shift, the word became TROUGH, trough, which we use even today. So these kind of dialectical differences came up due to the movement of these tribes to various regions. Next thing that we need to understand is gradation and mutation. Okay, another point that you could take down is the complicated structure of Anglo-Saxon grammar. So they were kind of the nouns. Why do you say that Anglo-Saxon grammar was complicated? Because the nouns, for example, had 3 gender systems. So for example, if you have the word girl, now the girl was considered to be of neuter gender. Okay, imagine a girl, the word girl was considered to be a neuter gender, whereas a woman, the word woman could be associated to 2 genders. One is a feminine gender, another is a neuter gender too. So these kind of these kind of rules made the entire language complicated. Okay, and if you also see that adjectives, adjectives had there were strong adjectives, there were weak adjectives. So not all adjectives could be used with all nouns. So some of them so there were restrictions as to you is supposed to use only strong adjectives with strong nouns in the sense masculine gender, and then weak adjectives should be used with neuter gender. And when one word could be used in both genders, then it was completely confusing, right? So for a person ages later to study that language was completely, maybe the Anglo-Saxons themselves felt it easy, I don't know, but then when philologists studied several centuries later, they found that the grammar of Anglo-Saxons was very complicated. Next important point is about gradation and mutation. These are some of the characteristics of Old English, which we would be talking about now. What is gradation? Gradation is also called as ablot. You may note down ABLAUT, ablot. Now, what is gradation? Gradation is seen in especially the verbs in a sentence, the vowel sounds in a sentence. okay, vowel sounds that undergo a change based on whether they occur in a stressed or an unstressed syllable. That's called as gradation. So gradation is also called as ablaut. Say, for example, if you have a sentence, can she do it? Can she do it? Look at this sentence. Can she do it? Now you have three vowel sounds here. One is can, and another is he. That is e sound. The next is u sound. Okay. Now she.
Ma'am, your voice is not clear. We are not
Ma'am,
able to
someone
hear
making
you.
noise.
Ma'am, lot of disturbance, ma'am.
Who's not on mute, and that's the reason my voice is getting disturbed. There's someone who is unmuted themselves, I think. Okay, I think they've muted themselves. So what is gradation? So gradation is the change in the vowel sounds when they occur in a stressed or an unstressed syllable. Say, for example, can he do it? Can he do it? Can he do it? So when we say can he do it, the stress is on an, can. Okay? If the stress moves to he, say, can he do it? Now, when I say, can he do it, look at this way I pronounce CA and can there. I say, can he? But when previous time I said, can he do it? Can he do it? Whereas in the second type, I say, can he do it? Look at the change in the vowel sound can and can. Can he do it? Can he do it? Can he do it? Can he do it? So I hope you find the difference here. One is can he do it? Another is can he do it? So when I say can he do it, I reduce the vowel, I shorten the vowel can. I shorten the vowel sound a in can. Can he do it? The a becomes a. Can he do it? Another variation, another gradation. Can he do it? So I almost shorten a of can, e of he, and then I try to extend or elongate do. Can he do it? So oo, it becomes oo. So this is called as gradation. So there's a grading that happens in the verbs, in the vowel sounds, depending on the stress. Where is the stress? If the stress is on can, or the stress is on he, or the stress is on do. Okay, so depending on this, we find gradation or ablaut. The next is mutation, which is also called as umlaut. Now, this is important.
Ma'am, if we stress on the particular word, the word we have to say gradation word, ma'am.
What is it?
Ma'am, if we stress on a particular word, like can means the word we have to say the gradation word.
No. The process is called as gradation. So the meaning changes, the vowel sounds change. So this process is called as gradation. Okay?
Okay, ma'am. Okay, ma'am.
This process is called as gradation. So maybe there could be a question saying that the change in the vowels, the change that the vowel sounds undergo based on stressed and unstressed syllables is called dash. It's called gradation. Okay? Is the point clear to everybody? Is there anyone who has a doubt here?
Clear, ma'am.
Clear, everybody?
Yes, ma'am.
Anyone who has a doubt? Okay. So let's go on to mutation, which is very important, and there are repetitive questions on mutation in your examination. So please pay attention. Mutation is called umlaut, UMLA. So now we've been hearing this word mutation of late. There are quite a few. The virus, the coronavirus has mutated. So what is this mutation? Mutation is a change, okay, a kind of a change, due to, it could be due to variation. It could be so the change. There's someone who has unmuted themselves. Can you please mute? Thank you. So, so mutation occurred between 600 to 700 AD. Now, why? How do we say that? Because philologists feel that mutation was almost completed by 700 AD because words that came in after 700 AD did not undergo this mutation. So mutation is now you need to first understand what is the front vowel. Now in the process of mutation, the front vowels, that is the E and the A sound, the I and the E vowel, okay, they remained unaffected. Whereas the back vowels, the A, O and U, they became mutated. Okay, so now if you look at this, I can give you a lot of examples. Now the inflection due to I mutation, say for example, the result is the singular of foot is feet, right? So the O sound changes to E sound in plural. Similarly, goose. So how did we build up? Now, what is this mutation all about? You know that now we can take a very live example of how mutation has kind of given rise to a second coronavirus wave, a COVID-19 wave. So what is this mutation? It is actually expanded the capacity of the virus itself. So similarly, when we take mutation in language, what did this mutation do? It expanded the language. So by expanding the language, what happened to the language? The language increased in its vocabulary. The vocabulary increased. The number of words in the language increased due to mutation. So please understand that mutation contributed to the expansion of English vocabulary. Okay, so how did we arrive at these plurals? We might have a doubt. So I'm sure many of you would have had this doubt when you were very young. When CUT is cut, why is PUT put? Why is the plural of foot feet, and why is the plural of child children? Why is the plural of man woman? Man men, woman men, whereas child children. Okay, so these kind of doubts that we would have had, where the reason or the answer to this dates back to this era, the 600 to 700 AD, when English underwent I would say a huge change, a huge paradigm shift. It happened during this age, a paradigm shift that gave rise to this language that we speak today. So we have a lot of headings under this. Just a minute. Okay. So we have a lot of headings under this. So examples maybe you can take down is the singular of foot becoming feet, the singular of the plural of goose becoming geese. Okay, so these are the result of what we call as I mutation. Okay, you have mutated. These are called as mutated plurals. Say tooth, teeth, mouse, mice. Look at this tooth, teeth. It's something like foot, feet. Okay, where the U sound changes to E sound. So this is called as the I mutation. Now the letter is I, but then the sound is E. Okay, so the letter is I, but then the sound is E. So this is called as the E mutation. The U sound changes to E sound. The OW sound changes to I sound. Now mouse, mouse, M-O-U-S-E, mouse. Now when we talk of mutation, we are only talking of sounds, not the spelling. Okay, so please understand the word mouse, which has the vowel sound, the diphthong ow, it changes to I, mice, I. Okay, so if I had a board, then I would have written it. I'm not sure whether I can Do I have a place to write and show you? No, it doesn't work. Okay, so I hope you're able to understand this. The ow sound changes to I sound. The E sound changes to O sound changes to E sound. Okay, so it is called the E mutation, mutated plurals. The second point is mutated abstract nouns from adjectives. For example, O changes to A. Okay, say long changes to length. Strong changes to strength. Hail changes to hill. The A sound changes to A. O sound changes to O sound changes to A. This is abstract nouns from adjectives. Then we have, maybe you can just take note of these examples so that because the question is, the way the question is framed in the exam is what is the cause, or say the plural of tooth is teeth. What could be the reason for this, or what could have given rise to this? So this is nothing but I mutation. You should be able to answer this as I mutation. Then we have the mutated verbs from cognate nouns. Say for example, oo to e. Okay, oo to e. Say for example, food to feed. Moot to meet. Okay. So these are cognate nouns.
Ma'am,
So-
can you repeat that abstract nouns into adjective forms? Hey,
Sure.
hill. Some of the examples.
From O to A. Okay, short A. O
Yeah.
to A. That is long O to length. A.
Okay, ma'am. Okay.
Okay. Now there is A to A. That is hail to help. A to A. Okay. Is it clear?
Yes, ma'am.
So the third one is oo. The long oo or long O changes to long E. Say food changes to feed. Then moat. Moat is, even today it is used. Maybe you can just take note of it in case you get one word, or one question on this. M-O-T, moat. Okay, it's not. There's a line over O which shows that it's a long vowel. Moat. Okay, M-O-T, but then there is a line above O which shows that it's a long vowel. It's O, which means meeting. So this moat became meet, M-E-E-T. But then this word moat has been retained. It actually originated. It originated from Saxon. Okay, the language, Saxon language, and in the Saxon language, the word moat meant parliament. Okay, the word moat, M-O-T, O with a long sound, moat, originally meant parliament in Saxon language. Okay. Originally, the word was Wittenage mort, Wittenage, W-I-T-E-N-A-G-E-M-O-T, Wittenage mort. So that was a word for parliament in Saxon language. And today, M-O-T, mort, which originally meant as Parliament Hall, is today called the Moot Hall. So moat became moot today. There's another shift. Okay, O to U. O to E was I mutation. And there is also something called as a U mutation, which is not that important. But this moat to moot is an example of U mutation. Okay. Moat to moot. And this is a contemporary word. A moot hall means a meeting hall. Okay. Then the fourth is the mutated verbs from adjectives. So these are verbs which had their origin in adjectives. Say for example, the action fill a cup of water, fill a glass. Okay, fill, the action fill originated from full. So it is from U we got the sound E. Full U sound we got the sound fill, E sound. Similarly, hail, to heal. Okay, you know that, how are you? We are hale and healthy. Okay, so hail means something that related to good health. Heal, H-E-E-L. Heal here did not doesn't mean the heel of our foot. Okay, it means H-E-A-L. Though it underwent a change of H-E-E-L, slowly became H-E-A-L in 21st century. In maybe I think 16th or 17th century, they had to differentiate when it came to homophones. You know, they had to differentiate H-E-E-L, which is a part of our feet, the heel, and then H-E-A-L, heal, to heal a wound, heal a pain. Okay, so originally H-E-E-L means to heal a pain, to comfort someone. All right, so the sound shifted, the adjective shifted, the verb originated from the adjective, the shift from U to E and A to E. Okay, so mutated verbs from adjectives. Example of I mutation. Then mutated comparative and superlative degrees of adjectives. Example, elder to eldest, strong to strongest. So EST, the sound of EST again came from mutation. The addition of EST for superlative degree, okay, it came because of I mutation. E mutation. Est, right? So elder, eldest, strong, strongest. Okay, this is a very important. I think even before this, I'll have to tell you something. The Latin influence on Old English. So, how did the Latin influence actually occur? Point number one, due to Roman occupation of Britain. Okay, and point number two, because of introducing Latin Christianity in England in the 6th century. So these are two reasons why Latin had its influence on Old English, which is nothing but Anglo-Saxon. Okay, so what are the two reasons? One is the Roman occupation of Britain, and second one is introduction of Latin Christianity in England in the 6th century. So we are talking of Old English period, which is from 600 AD to 1100 AD. So we had Latin Christianity coming into England in the 6th century. So what happened due to Roman occupation? What kind of words that came into England because of Roman occupation? You may note them down. Place names. Place names that ended in caster, C-A-S-T-E-R. Place names that ended in Chester, C-H-E-C. So you have Lancaster, you have Manchester, right? So caster, words, place names ending in caster, place names ending in Chester. These two came from Latin. Then we had finance-related words because of trade. Then we had construction-related word because when these Romans came to, a Roman civilization, all of us very familiar with the way Roman castles, Roman buildings, Roman architecture is very famous. So when these Romans came to England, they tried to establish their architecture. They try to promote their kind of buildings, their architecture, and so we find that construction started to influence the local architecture, British indigenous architecture, and that's how we also find words related to construction, cities, citadels, forts, words related to buildings, okay, architecture. So place names, finance related words, construction and city related words. They came from Latin due to Roman occupation. Then because of introduction of Latin Christianity, we also find words related to religion from Latin to English. Okay. So next comes the Danish or the Norse element in Old English. Certain place names ending like by, say which by, Grimsby. These are words that came from Danish or Norse. Please make note of these because you might have a question saying this particular word says, say for example, Lancaster had its origin from which language? So you'll have to say that's from Latin. Say you might have a question, say Grimsby had its origin from dash. You might say you should say Danish or Norse. So word endings, place names ending in by, by, they had their origin in Danish or Norse. You might, there's a lot of words now. After mutation, we are doing vocabulary, right? So in vocabulary, we find that certain words, because of these influence of Latin, Norse on the original Celtic language, we find that some words got elevated meaning. I mean, the words that were not, the words that did not enjoy good status, or words that did not have, that meant something very low, they acquired good, better meaning. They acquired better meaning due to the better status or the better sense that were associated with them. Say for example, TUN, okay, pronounced as tune. TUN, U with a long, with a line above, or a line overhead, which means it's a long vowel, which would be pronounced as tune. It originally meant a small group of houses, okay, but later on this began to be called as town. So the oo sound became ow, tune became town, and now you know how town is actually a word. I mean, a town enjoys a better status than a village, right? I would say, going by the sense the word conveys. Okay, so town is obviously bigger than a village, and it enjoys a better status than a village. So a person from a village and a person from a town. So obviously, we would say a person from a town has more exposure, is more it maybe enjoys a better status or so on. So the word going by its sense itself enjoys a better status. So because of the influence of other languages, say Latin and Norse, on the Celtic tongue, we find some words got elevated status, some words got degraded in their meaning. Then we also have names, proper nouns, people, names of people, which began to be associated with the profession that they were into. For example, the surnames called Smith, Stewart. Okay, you know these surnames: SMIT, Smith, STEWARD, Stewart. So these kind of surnames originated from the profession undertaken by the people themselves. Okay, so maybe a blacksmith, he could have been a blacksmith, he could have been a silversmith, and later on the profession came to be called the surname itself of that clan, of that family. Similarly, steward, a person could have been a steward in a bar, steward in a hotel, in a restaurant, but later on the name of the profession, the title given to that person in that profession became the family name itself, or the personal pronoun. I mean, the pronoun. It's the proper noun itself. Okay. Then we have some words which I told you. They some of them had they began to acquire lower status. For example, KNAVE, which is called knave, right? So the meaning that we all know of a knave person is someone who is dishonest, right? Oh, he's a knave person, so he's a knave idiot. So a person who is kind of very secretive about something, who is very dishonest, who is not truthful. Okay, that's the meaning that we all understand. But originally, the word KNAVE, knave, meant a boy. So due to the influence of other languages, we find that the word knave, which originally meant just a boy, came to be degraded as a person who's dishonest. Okay. Similarly, with fiend, Fiend. Fiend originally came from the sense enemy. Okay. So a friend and a fiend. Okay. So friend, opposite of friend was fiend. Fiend means enemy. But later on, now what do we know of fiend? Fiend means someone who is devilish, right? One who is evil. He is called fiend today. Fiend is a demon. According to modern English dictionary, we find fiend as someone who is demonic, who is a demon. We find that the word fiend, which originally meant only an enemy, an opposite of the word friend, but came to be known as evil itself. Okay, so this is how we find that language is influenced from the other language. Had a great impact on English vocabulary, Celtic vocabulary. You need to understand that the Venerable Bede wrote the Ecclesiastical History of the English People. It's an important document which speaks of the history of English language, starting from Julius Caesar's invasion to that of Venerable Bede's time itself. It tries to focus on the conflict between the Roman and the Celtic Christianity. Now we find that the Roman leadership came through Julius Caesar, right? So from it kind of distinguishes between the Roman and the Celtic Christianity, how Roman and the work is written in Latin. Please remember that Ecclesiastical History of the English People is written in Latin, written by Venerable Bede. Okay, the name the writer is Bede, Venerable Bede. The Venerable is a title given to him, so he was originally a priest, okay, an Anglo-Saxon priest. It's an important document which talks of the Anglo-Saxon history. So, the work actually plays a key role in development of English as a national identity itself. Please remember this. And then, so as I told you, it starts with 55 BC when Julius Caesar invaded England to that of 731 when Bede really wrote this work. So, and in the 21st century, how is it relevant today, as we say? Even today, we talk of how history, how English language originated. So, now this class is all about how English language originated. Where did it have its origin? The original form of modern English. Where was its roots? Okay, even today we talk of that, right? So, even this work is very relevant to the 21st century also because we have the manuscripts of this work preserved. Okay, so the reading and a lot of research is being happening in this on this work by Venerable Bede. So you can remember this for that. So how Venerable Bede's work, the Ecclesiastical History of the English People, though it's a religious document, it also can be called a historical document because it traces the history of the Anglo-Saxons. Okay, fine. Now, maybe you can just make note of this that Anglo-Saxon dictionary had 20,000 words, whereas the modern English Oxford Dictionary has 400,000 words. And now this was maybe recorded maybe a couple of decades ago, but now I'm sure it has crossed more than I would say a crore. Okay. So Old English was spoken until the 1000 AD. So you know that it is from 600 to 1100 AD. So Old English is spoken until 1000 AD. So it was not actually a pure language. So though Indo-European Indo-European was a parent tongue, we find that certain words that were related to nature, say the sun, animals, the moon, stars, sky, and then you have the day, night, then you have water, then you have trees, words related to nature. They belong to the nomadic tribes only. Okay, and have I written this here? Just a minute, please. So, so this is something that you need to remember. Okay, so Old English was not a pure language. It has lot of influence from the others, except for the natural words that belong to nature, which the nomadic tribes themselves experienced. Except for that, the others came from outside the British land. If you look at the chronology of how English grew, from the Old English to the Middle English, we find that 1871 to 1899, King Alfred ruled the Wessex region, and he tried to take ownership of the entire kingdom itself. He tried to rule the entire English land, and so we find that he did do that. By 899, we find that King Alfred had almost expanded his regime to the entire Wessex region, beyond Wessex regions too. And one important role that King Alfred played in the development of English is he sponsored a lot of translation of Latin works to English. So he promoted the English language by sponsoring works of translation. We all are under the conception that French entered the English land through Norman conquest, right? But even before that, we find that there is an influence of French in the English tongue. If you look at this king called Ethelred, he married a French princess, okay? And so their son, that is, who later came to be known as Edward the Confessor. So Ethelred and his French wife, they both sent Edward, their son, to France for his education. So when Edward the Confessor came back to England after his education, or even during his education, he used to bring along with him a lot of his French friends. Okay, so friends from the from France. So slowly, and I would say gradually, the movement of people to and from France increased in number. So they were not just Edward the Confessor's friends, but they were the friends of his friends, friends of their friends, family, and slowly the French population in the English land grew to a great extent. And that is why we find that when Edward the Confessor ruled England from 1042 to 1066, so it was only in 1066 that we find French invasion, right, the Norman conquest. But 1042 to 1066, when Edward the Confessor ruled England, we find that the language of the court was itself French. So the common man spoke English, whereas the language of the court was French. So that's how the language came to I would say acquire this status of the language of the court, or the regal language that we say, the language of the rulers. Okay, that's how French came to be known as the language of the rulers, or the language of law, the language of the court. Okay, the language of the royal people, the language of the regal. Okay, so that's how, because of Edward the Confessor, he was corely instrumental to bring French into the English court, or English I would say rule. All right. Then slowly, so originally English was a mix of Latin, Celtic, and Danish until the Norman invasion. So when we say English or the Anglo-Saxon, or the Old English that we say, it was a mix of Latin, Celtic, and Danish. So with the influence, with the Edward the Confessor bringing in a lot of his French influence into not just the court proceedings, but also in his lifestyle. So he started living the French way. So the French lifestyle also came into the English land. With Norman conquest, in 1066, it was completely, the language was established as the language of nobility or the learned professions. And Anglo-Saxon began to be remained the language of the commoners. But gradually, the Norman French and English together became what we now call as the Middle English or the mixed Anglo-French, which is nothing but the parent of the modern English that we speak today. So that's why we see unconsciously, we might, those of us who have studied French in school, we'll know that quite a few words that we speak today have had their origin or their relation or their acquaintance with French itself. So we speak a lot of French words as a part and parcel of English. Okay, so we unconsciously do that because after all, English is a language of borrowings, a bag of borrowings, as we all know. So after the Norman invasion, French became the official language, and Anglo-Saxon became the commoners' language. And slowly, because obviously the court cannot function without the commoners, and the commoners cannot live without the rulers. So slowly, the French and the English, though the amount of words that originally came into the dialect or the commons, the speaking, the communication language was quite less. Compared to Latin and Danish and Scandinavian influence, we find the French words, the loan words were quite less during the Middle English period. Only after Middle English, during Old English period, only when Middle English period began, we find that the French loan words they grew in number because of the influence. So Old English words, the Anglo-Saxon had Latin, Celtic, and Danish. When the French got mixed with this existing language, it became the Middle English. Any doubts still here? Any doubts?
No,
No,
ma'am.
ma'am.
No, ma'am.
I hope it's all clear to everybody.
Yes, ma'am.
Yes, ma'am.
So I have 20 more minutes, and I should quickly finish the main characteristics of Middle English. So the period of Middle English is between 1100 and 1500 AD. So there are two main characteristic changes in Middle English. One is in grammar, another is in vocabulary. When we talk of dialect, pronunciation, and spelling, they are they're not. I wouldn't say they are minor, but then the maximum change has occurred only in grammar and vocabulary. Okay, so a dialect, pronunciation, and spelling are related to vocabulary itself, and that's why I have not characterized them under any as main headings. But then grammar and vocabulary are the two main headings under which we find a sizable change or a sizable expansion. Let's go to grammar first. So the first change that we find in Middle English is that they began to rely less on inflectional endings. Okay, say the EST form, the OST forms, the inflectional endings that we had in the Old English, it was completely cut down. Then the noun cases disappeared, except the genitive or the possessive case. There were more than 5 cases, but they were totally done away with in the Middle English. And this is mainly due to the reduction of vowels in unstressed final syllables. Then the second important change was the plurals and infinitives ended in en. For example, now you know that the archaic English, when we say brother, the plural of brother is brethren, right? B-R-E-T-H-R-E-N. You will find this in Shakespearean works too. In Chaucerian works, in Shakespearean works, we find the plural of brother is brethren. So the endings of plurals with en came up in Middle English. Similarly, infinitives, you know what are infinitives, right? To plus the verb is called an infinitive. So even in infinitives, we had en endings. For example, to seek was to be to seeken, to drink was to be drinken. Okay, so the en in the infinitives, this was a change in the Middle English. You will find that this is also close to now, though it happened in the 12th century. We find this is very much relevant even in the 16th century literary works. Okay. Then the third was earlier I told you that there were three genders, right? The feminine, masculine, and the neuter, right? And it was not associated with the word, but then now in the Middle English, the gender became dependent on the meaning. For example, if I told you, I gave you the example of a girl, the word girl, it was under neuter gender, though it indicates a woman, it indicates a feminine gender. It was considered the neuter gender in grammar. That's why the Old English grammar was considered complicated. But now in the Middle English, we find that the gender depended more on the sense of the word itself, okay, or the meaning of the word itself. And that's how we have today the three genders, where the masculine refers to the male, the feminine refers to the female, and the neuter refers to the non-living. Okay. So these three, this categorization came up only in the Middle English period. So as we know that English has never been a pure language or a homogeneous language. It's always been a heterogeneous one. So in the Middle English, it all the more became heterogeneous in the sense it was not just Latin and Scandinavian, but it also had French words in it. And so we find there is a lot of change in the register, you know what a register is, right? So we find a lot of change in the registers. We find a lot of change in stylistic I would call, what do I call it, the style in which a word was used. Okay. For example, the word very that we used to, Very, very. It originally came from this word Verrai. Verrai, Verai. So from Verai, the pronunciation is Verai. Okay, Verrai. Originally, the meaning was also different. Meaning of Verai was true. True. Slowly, the meaning. So this is what I meant by stylistic registers. So the meaning and the pronunciation underwent a change to what we have today as very, something that is more in number, something that you emphasize, increased in quantity, emphasis on quantity, emphasis on quality. Okay, so very, Very. So this is what I told you. There was a change in the stylistic registers too, a complete change in the way a word was used. We because of the French influence, we have words words related to feudal system, legal terms, ecclesiastical systems coming into the English tongue or the English language. All right. What are the Scandinavian borrowings? Some important Scandinavian borrowings. Maybe you can note them down. The pronoun, very important. They, them, their. The pronouns they, them, their were borrowed from Scandinavian language. Okay. They, them, and their. The pronouns, they were borrowed from Scandinavian language. So the work by Orum, O-R-U-M, the work by Orum called as titled Ormulum, O-R-M-U-L-U-M. This is an important work because Orum uses a lot of words of Scandinavian origin in his work Ormulum, O-R-M-U-L-U-M. Orum uses a lot of Scandinavian words in this work. I would give you some examples here. W-R-O-N-G, wrong. B-L-O-O-M, bloom. To want. Then we have bloom. I told you bloom. I think to bait. B-A-I-T, bait. You have wing. Then you have anger. These are some of the words borrowed from Scandinavian. Some of the words that we have from French, like mercy. I told you we have words related to feudal system, then we have words related to ecclesiastical system, then legal terms we have. So some examples that I can give you, one is mercy, which we get from French, okay? Mercy, pity, though the spelling could differ, okay? The spelling could differ, but then the word as such we have taken from the French language. Mercy, pity, beauty, humility, repentance, charity. These are some words from the French language. Chapel, so religious, ecclesiastical words. Chapel, cathedral, abbey, convent, ale, altar. These are French derivatives. Clock, C-L-E-R-K, clock. Then we have confession, parish, clergy, apostle. All these words related to the ecclesiastical or ecclesiastic words, they come from the French language. You may find them in your material, I guess, right? Do you have it in your material?
Yes, ma'am.
Do you have these words in your material? At least some sample words?
Not to be good for me.
No, ma'am. No, ma'am.
Oh,
No,
no.
ma'am.
So maybe then you can take them down as such. Maybe
PDF,
just remember that ecclesiastical words related to the feudal system. Then we have legal terms. They were all borrowed from the French tongue. Okay.
Yes, ma'am.
Then we also have Eastern words from the East. Maybe you can note them down. Words like algebra,
Eastern words.
orange, azure, A-Z-U-R-E, azure. These are some of the words that English has borrowed from Eastern languages. Now we have lot more of languages, even pajamas, right? Pajamas, almira. Then we have roti. Then we have all these have entered the English dictionary, the Oxford Dictionary itself. Pajamas have entered. They're all Indian words, typical Indian words. Kurta has entered. Then a lot of even recently there were a couple of words that entered the Oxford Dictionary, Indian languages. So that's off late, but then it happened even then, even in the 12th century itself. What about dialect? So you also should know that the West Midland dialect stayed on as the standard Middle English dialect. Okay, so standard Middle English was West Midland dialect. Please make note of it under dialect. There are a lot of variety of dialects available, but West Midland dialect. And how did it come? Because of the poem Patience, P-A-T-I-E-N-C-E. The poem Patience was written in the West Midland dialect. And this is the West Midland dialect that stayed on as the Middle English dialect. And if you find just a minute. Okay, so there was also, we find that in Middle English, we find that there is a leveling tendency. Now, what is this leveling tendency? Now, we find that in Old English or the Anglo-Saxon, there was this, there was an inclination towards the West Saxon standard when it came to spelling, grammar, and vocabulary, right? So that was slowly in the similarly in the Middle English period, we find that the East Midland dialect came to be considered as the okay. Now this I think I made a mistake there. So earlier I said the West Midland dialect stayed on, right? Whereas in actually the East Midland dialect that stayed on. The poem Patience was written in West Midland dialect. So I just wanted to mention that because that began the leveling tendency. The poem Patience began the leveling tendency. So what is this leveling tendency? As I told you, just like how we had in the Anglo-Saxon period, we had the West Saxon dialect as the standard form of Anglo-Saxon. During the Middle English, we find the East Midland dialect to be the standard form. So in case of spellings, in case of grammar, in case of the words used, in case of the stressed and the unstressed syllables used, people started considering the East Midland dialect to be the standard one. Why? What is the reason? First reason is that this dialect of the East Midland dialect was spoken in and around London, and all of us know that London was the hub of all affairs, the entire English affairs. It surrounded it happened in and around London, and so London was the hub, and so this dialect was also used in Oxford and Cambridge, the two educational centers of education. So centers of scholarship. Okay, so since East Midland dialect was used in Oxford and Cambridge, the dialect gained a lot of importance, and we also find that Chaucer and other prominent writers of the time used this dialect in their works. Caxton, when he began his printing press in 1476, some of his earliest books were printed. One of the earliest books that he printed were in the East Midland dialect. Okay, and so that's how spellings also got fixed because of that. And similarly, we find in pronunciation too, we find the East Midland dialect to be of standard. I think the rest, which I have noted down, could be only extra information, which maybe I could continue in the next class. Maybe you'll have to also think of how John Wycliffe and his followers called Lollards. You know, John Wycliffe was a reformative figure, of a prominent figure of Reformation. So Reformation also contributed to the increase in vocabulary of Middle English. Okay, it contributed to the growth and development of Middle English. Slowly, Reformation, Renaissance, the printing press, all of these led to the origin or led to the development of modern English. So these were, Middle English was nothing but, how we call the middle, the path. Okay, so Middle English was nothing but the root or the connecting link from Old English to the modern English, and that's why we dealt with almost all aspects in pronunciation and spelling. What you need to remember under this is East Midland dialect was the standard during the Middle English period. Okay.